All right, so as everybody know, Mike here has his podcast, True.
It's called Detective Story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't want to say true crime, but that's a different thing.
Well, that's a genre, kind of.
Yeah.
And Chris Kafkas, my brother-in-law, is my co-host. It's Detective Story with Mike Hammond. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, and all that stuff. And we have a partnership with Sal, which is awesome.
Yep. And I've been sharing his stuff on Facebook and trying to I don't know, get together, combine each other's
Yeah,
superpowers.
right. Or medium powers.
Medium
in
powers,
our
yeah.
case, I don't know.
Yeah. You hit Wonder Twins, it just goes.
Yeah, right.
But so, Chris, what do you do when you co-host? I mean,
I think one of the things the first thing I always want to do is just make sure everybody's comfortable, right? Because a lot of people, even with seasoned veterans on let's say, on the police department, the camera kind of freaks some people out. So make sure everybody's comfortable, and then just kind of help to steer the conversation. Really, that's it. Just try and think of questions that other people might not ask, especially if it's a conversation between Mike and another police officer. Those guys, I find they have a shared experience, but I'm coming from a different perspective, right?
Right.
And so I just try and add that little extra perspective into the conversation. And
yeah, right. I think if I can break in real quick, one of the things he does great is, like, we had the former chief of detectives on recently. We had a homicide detective I used to work with, and her husband, who was a homicide detective. We can sometimes get too techie, you know what I mean, or too much inside of our own language way of talking. And Chris can sometimes say, "Okay, for our listeners, tell us what he knows," because I've been sitting across a bar from him for 40 years, but he understands that, like, the average person watching this may not have any idea what the hell they
they're
mean by
basing their experience largely on TV, right?
Right.
And other podcasts, which may be good, but they might not understand a process or exactly what they're saying when they use particular language. I also find that I'm usually the funny one on the show, but
I think that's up for debate, but okay.
but also to just try and see a larger picture here and help us to get from point A to point Z. Because a lot of times in these conversations are so interesting, and one little subject we could get stuck on some of the nuance of a particular incident in a particular case, or for an hour and a half, and just talk about when you approach, like our first podcast, it was really our second podcast,
It's Koska?
It's Kauska homicide.
Yeah, that was actually two of them.
They approach a car, or the car was approached, but they have this situation and involving an automobile, and they approach it with a very particular plan. You could get lost on just that part of that specific part of that case for an hour and a half, right? The scene of the crime and how they approach the scene of a crime and what they do from that point on, easy hour and a half. Because as an outsider looking in, like, what are you looking for when you walk up? And yeah.
Yeah, and I think as another good example, real quick, like we're going to release it here in the next couple of weeks, but we had former Superintendent Eddie Johnson came on, and he was great, but I found myself getting a little stuck he was my sergeant in Area 4 Homicide on the West Side, and I knew him back then. We got along great and that, but then he starts to go up the ladder all the way to the top,
Right.
and I'm finding myself thinking from a homicide detective's perspective, like, well, what does the superintendent think about this from the high vantage point, right? Because I am focused on the case I'm working on. And I got a little bit kind of stuck in that. And Chris was great. I would step in and kind of saying, oh, here's something I've always wanted to know, like, what do you, and kind of opening the conversation back up again, which I'm really excited to release that episode because
That was particularly fascinating because, I live in Chicago. He was a superintendent of the police force that I rely on. And here, for me, here's a guy that I'd never thought I would be in the same room with and get to ask questions of. And there he is sitting across the table. And it was like, oh boy. And it's just kind of like Mike said, I've been sitting across the bar from him and other officers for 40 years. Sometimes alongside him until the recent past. But this is a different setting. So I get to ask some other questions, particularly pertaining to the work that they do or a specific case. I'm fascinated by, for me, I've seen the impact that doing this job has on their lives firsthand. But yet they show up every day and they go out and they work day after day after day after day. And I like to think that I can help relay how and why they do that to some of the listeners.
Well, being a bar owner and having other police officers come in there, Chicago police officers or other law enforcement that come in, you've probably seen them change over the years, right? From maybe they might have been newbies or I don't know, we call them being green
Yeah.
to being seasoned and just,
clueless is another good word.
being clueless to being a couple years in and then a couple more years and just seeing how they change, right? Probably both of you have seen that. And
Yeah. See the impact that time. I don't know if this is the right way to phrase it, but time and exposure has, right? Just with myself being in the service industry for almost 40 years.
right.
I look back on myself as a young bartender and how I am now, and they're two different people.
Right.
Yeah. We say, and you probably saw this in the military, I'm guessing, I don't know, but it may be things are more condensed in the military, but we have this kind of saying on the police department, and I think this is true a lot in the rest of the world, business and whatever. It takes about 5 years in any given spot to kind of figure out what you're really doing, right? Whether you get, as a patrolman, you first come out of the academy, about 2 years in, you really think you know what you're doing, but you don't. About 5 years in, you start to get settled in. Now you start to understand how you've been to court testifying. The same thing happens with a homicide detective. You could be a very experienced policeman. You make homicide detective or any kind of detective, and now it's a different game because you're doing longer term investigations. The reports are really important in court. And a year or two in's not enough because your cases don't start to hit trial for that time, and you don't really learn what you're doing until you get your ass kicked,
Right.
And so it kind of works in those increments. And Chris has seen me go through all of that. I met him when I was in the police academy, basically. So married his sister later, and we survived that.
He got me into divorce.
I got custody of him in divorce. Sorry, joke. So.
It would almost be the same way in the military. You come from basic training, AIT, then you get into your first duty station as a private. You really don't know what's going on. You kind of have the basic of it until you start getting a couple months, and then you're doing it for a couple years, and you figure it out, and then you're teaching other people the correct way of doing stuff.
Yeah.
Depending on what your job is, right? Everybody starts off as a green weenie, and then get seasoned.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Once you start getting to a point where you understand what you're doing enough where you're teaching other people, that's when your learning curve really accelerates, right?
Yeah.
Because as you're teaching other people or telling other people how to do things, if you're doing it right or trying to do it right, you see in yourself like, oh, holy shit,
So
mean, or whatever.
when did you go through the academy?
1994, 93, 94.
Graduated in 94, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And then you were just a regular patrolman.
correct.
Take us through all the steps. You
Yeah,
went
so
through.
I actually graduated from the academy in May of 1994. So I think I started in 94 too. And then it was, and then we, no, started, I apologize, started the academy May 31st, 94. And then the academy is about 6 months long, and then they send you out to a district. And I went to the 11th district, which is west side of Chicago, Garfield Park. I asked to go there, and because it was busy, and older policemen that I knew said, "You want to go somewhere busy to learn?" And boy, howdy, you learn quickly on the job. You get assigned with like a field training officer. I had a great one who was a little bit nuts, but he really liked being out there. And then I was patrolman for about 3 years, and I got the opportunity to go to the now defunct Special Operations Section, which was like a citywide gang violence response unit. And that was very high speed, very cool because we were wherever something would get hot in the city, we'd be sent to, mostly in uniform, sometimes in plain clothes. And then,
Because we're kind of like a rapid response unit, right?
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I mean, really, if there was a increase in violence in the neighborhood, gang violence in the neighborhood, you guys would get sent there. If there was a
Yeah, the
Police
district
involved shooting,
commander
yeah.
would request us.
yeah,
Yeah.
And that was inside of that, which back then was what was our SWAT team. Back then they called it HBT, hostage barricade, terrorist. I don't know if I got that right, but it later became the SWAT team. And that's inside of that was inside of special operations. Now I think SWAT's their own entity. But yeah, I got to learn. I made an arrest in there at the time. There were 25 police districts in the city of Chicago, and I made at least one arrest in every one. And because we were just all over, and then in 1999, I got the opportunity to go to narcotics. Not really. It was never like a narcotics super interested guy, but it was.
I was.
Yeah, but right. I always could lean on my brother-in-law because he knew drugs, quality control.
Quality control.
Quality control.
But I spent a year there, and then finally gave a detective's test. I studied harder for that than I did 4 years of college and 12 years of other school, and I got paid off because I made the first class, and then got pulled to Area 4 homicide right away. That was September of 2000. So I was there basically until I retired in 2016, but I did have about a 3-year stint we had a cold case homicide unit that was funded by federal grants. I went there and worked for 2 or 3 years, which was really fascinating and, got me a whole different experience.
Now, how did you see from being in a gang unit to narcotics to homicide? Was there such a different thinking of the minds for each one of those?
Yeah, the mindset was different for each one, certainly, because you're doing different things. In SOS, we were out there to get people off the street. To the district commander would request that we be sent there, and our job was to get players off the street, get guns off the street, slow down the violence. So we were literally, this is, mid 90s, and we were there to, slow the violence when they have an uptick in violence. And so it was go, 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 go all the time, locking people up.
Yeah, because you were never in a quiet district. You were.
Yeah, there was always something going on. And then narcotics, you are, at that time, Phil Klein was the commander, who later became superintendent, was the commander of narcotics, and he really changed the way narcotics did business. It used to be all buy bust, you'd send undercovers out, they'd make a few buys. Mm-hmm. He changed it to a conspiracy-driven thing so that we were getting better cases, longer-term cases. So it was more investigative, which proved to be really great for me as a detective. But Yeah, you're really thinking about, the whole picture and more than just out there kind of, for lack of a better word, kicking ass and taking names,
More of an impact, I would think, right? Instead of taking
you've
low-level dealers off the street
right.
corner just to be replaced by another, you're going after
The
Yeah.
their
bigger,
plugs. Yeah,
Yeah, it was pretty devastating for the street corner. They were called street corner drug conspiracies,
mhm.
and it was pretty devastating for those groups because, and it's also a little bit harsh. It was always like, oh, this is, you know what I mean? I always had a high eye towards homicide, but the thing is, all these things play together in the city of Chicago because our violence, which we're infamous for, is driven by, for the most part, control of narcotic sales
Mhm.
and the finances around that, right? So,
Right. Everybody's
um,
territory and
right,
this and that and whatever different type of gangs control what areas.
correct.
Something you don't find here in the suburbs, really. You know,
Which is good.
yeah. But so did the HRT teams get put into SWAT, but you said it's defunct. So they don't
Yes,
exist anymore.
yeah. Well, what happened? We had after I left, and I, that's an important distinction. But uh, I went to, like I said, 99. I went to narcotics 2000, make detective. In the early 2000s, it got, SOS was kind of overwhelmed with scandal. We had one policeman who was actually a good friend of mine. I hated that it happened, but there's no getting around that he did shit he shouldn't have done. Got caught like stealing drug money, doing some really nefarious shit, and he got caught. He paid for it, and they pretty much dismantled SOS at that point. There are still things that exist in a similar fashion, but nothing's designed the way it is now. They've gone to more like area. So in the city of Chicago, you have police districts, which are the smaller. Basically, if you live in the city of Chicago, you live in a police district, and those district coppers are going to come out from that station if you call them. And then we have areas which used to cover, there used to be 25 police districts. Each area had 5 districts, and that's where detectives worked out of. And it changed a little bit with different superintendents, everybody having their own spin. They closed some of the districts that were smaller, so we don't have as many districts anymore. But the point is, what they have done, instead of having like a citywide kind of response unit like that, each area kind of has like robbery teams, burglary teams that are made up of patrolmen, detectives, like task force almost, right?
Okay.
And you see that a lot more these days than back then.
you know, it never occurred to me. Did you find like when you shifted from SOS into narcotics? Did you find yourself kind of going through like maybe a little bit of an adrenaline crash? Were you a little bit of an adrenaline junkie when you were with? I know in 11 you guys were balls of the wall every day, and then SOS you were balls of the wall every day. There had to be a little bit of a shift in mindset, also like a tremendous lack of adrenaline rush, not doing that kind of, you know.
Well, yeah, I think to a degree, I think that adjustment was bigger going from the 11th district to SOS because what happened in the 11, I've been in 11 for 2.5 years, and it was rocking
Every night.
every day, right? And you knew by the time I'd started to know the players, where the players were, where
Yeah.
the spots were, and like you're on top of everything, and you know if these guys are going at it, something's going to jump off tonight, so you're really on it, right? SOS, it became citywide, so a lot of times I had no idea where I was. And, what you do as a young patrolman, and then when you start in a new district like that, you're looking at every time you come to a street corner, you're looking up, see where you're at, where you're at, where you're at. Always thinking, if somebody steps out and starts shooting at me right now, where am I? Right? I mean, you have to do that.
Never
And
even occurred to me.
and
Yeah.
so that adjustment kind of backed off that adrenaline. But then when I got to know what I was doing, it kind of picked up again. But me and Larry, who you know well, we went to narcotics together because the Phil Klein, he needed more enforcement officers, guys out there who were going to go arrest the bad guy, because he had a lot of people who were long-term investigators, a lot of like undercover buy officers, things like that. But he needed enforcement people, which sounds like thugs, but that's not what I mean. We need people who are going out and saying, all right, we're going to do a search warrant. We got buys into this guy. We need him stopped. And so Larry and I were never like, I think, I may have tried to, buy drugs undercover one time, but it's like,
Sorry.
you look like you just stepped out of freaking NYPD Blue or something. I ain't selling you shit.
For sure, officer.
No,
How much crack would you like, officer?
Larry was better at it than me. The one thing Larry and
Which
I,
is like equally shocking. This guy's like,
Larry,
maybe it's because I know you guys.
yeah. Well, the one thing that Larry and I were good at, it was there is one unit on the Chicago Police Department, and this is cause all kinds of shit probably, but it's true. There's one unit in the Chicago Police Department back in the day, I don't know if this still exists, where you can drink on duty, and that is the tavern team in narcotics. Now, you're only supposed to drink 1 or 2 beers over the course of however long you're in there. You're not supposed to get anywhere near intoxicated, but you don't want to go in and order coffee because everybody's going to be like, look at the copper sitting down there at the end of the bar, right? And Larry were really good, and I were really good in that role because we could blend in just about any tavern.
That makes sense.
It did. We could cross ethnic, economic, but it didn't matter. We could fit in, but we were never the people in there buying. We were always like the eyeballs.
First time I bought drugs on the West
Looking for underage drinkers.
First time I bought drugs on the West Side, a kid looks at me and goes, "You a cop?" I was like, "Do I look like a cop?" And he's like, "No, you look a little special."
Now, have you ever had anybody say that to you? Are you a cop? If you're undercover?
I didn't do it enough for that really came up, you know what I mean? And plus, I don't know, I think I carry myself in the way, the way that I approached the job, I always wanted to be involved in homicide investigations. And when you are looking hard all the time, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your military service, there's a difference between being in a place where you're never at like, code white or whatever. You're always like orange-ish, right? And
Always scanning, looking for exits and all that other stuff. Yeah.
right. And on the street, you're always looking for something that looks out of place, or you're looking for a face. If I'm looking for somebody, a witness, an offender. So you're always scanning hard, looking hard, and it's hard to get away from that. So everybody on the West Side, the South Side is like, there's the police right there, man. I mean, there's just no getting around it.
Yeah.
I was never going to be that outlaw biker undercover guy. Just, accept that role and keep me alive.
Now, what were the big gangs when you were on the teams that were players?
Well, so on the West Side, Area 4 was made up back in the day, was very a dynamic place because we had Pilsen and Little Village, which are big Mexican neighborhoods, great neighborhoods, beautiful neighborhoods, great food, but also very entrenched with Mexican gangs, right? And then we had the West Side, Garfield Park, North Lawndale, and South Lawndale, South Humboldt Park. South Humboldt Park back in the day was a lot of Puerto Rican gangs, and then the Garfield Park and all of that was all African American gangs. So the gangs so what we would do, we had a group of detectives that often worked the Spanish neighborhoods. A lot of them were Spanish speakers, but also a lot of them worked over there and knew them. And those are predominantly in Little Village are the Latin Kings and 2-6. A little east of there are Spanish Cobras, and I'm going too far in the weeds here because I'm not super Latin gang knowledgeable. I was always really knowledgeable of the African American gang. So on the West Side, it was vice lords, and they were broken up into groups: conservative vice lords, traveling vice lords, four corner house. That was one of his favorite things when I first started working out there. He said he used to, your joke, right? You're going to
start a gang called the Orthodox Vice Lords, made of Hasidic Jews. conservative vice lords. It just cracks me up.
Yeah,
Like,
conservative
not-
vice
If
lords.
there's any conservative vice lords out there, it's not meant to inflame you.
No, no, we're not calling you the MAGA vice lords, but yeah. So that was one ilk, and then you had the kind of gangster disciple tree, which was like Black Souls, New Breeds, Black Disciples, Gangster Disciples, BGDs, Black Gangster Disciples.
It's interesting. Isn't New Breed like an Aryan gang in the prison system?
I don't know. I only knew of them. They're a very active, violent group on the west side of Chicago, the New Breeds. Back in the day, they had some real hardcore players, shooters.
The whole history of Chicago gang and Chicago gang culture is just
It's fascinating.
It's
It really
fascinating.
is. I mean, and you can go back really well to Capone and beyond before, but really it starts kind of in that late 50s, early 60s. Well, the white gangs and the greasers and the Spanish gangs were kind of the same, especially
Guys,
Puerto Rican gangs.
I would say in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s.
It really starts to change. Crack cocaine changed the dynamic of everything. But to tell you how powerful and entrenched the Chicago gangs are, like the Gangster Disciples, the Vice Lords, the Latin Kings, 2-6, Maniac Latin Disciples, these different groups. Crack cocaine had hit New York, Baltimore, Philly, LA, all these other places, and was ravaging it. And we didn't see it in Chicago for a couple of years. And the reason was those gangs, there are no Crips or Bloods in Chicago, or they don't stay very long. I mean, our gangs are too entrenched, too old here, and they were not going to allow it in until they knew how to control it. Once they did figure that out, and they figured out the economics of it, and how to get it out there, starting in that 92 to 94 range. My first couple of years, we had nearly 1,000 murders in the city of Chicago. It was
It's also why like
up for grabs, man. It was nuts.
meth hasn't ever been a
No, really, you only see meth in the gay community
Yeah.
traditionally in Chicago. You don't really see it outside of that because of that.
Yeah.
Really, there's no.
I want to say, I think just a couple weeks ago in Aurora, they busted a meth
Yeah.
group or
Yeah.
something like that, or whatever you want to call it.
I mean, it ravaged the rest
Yeah.
of the. It's ravaging the rest of the country. Chicago, like I'm probably fine that too. But I mean, coke was coke, crack, heroin readily available. I get that right away. But meth would be. I mean, it's just different.
Yeah,
What was the big thing for the biker gangs?
that was
Meth.
meth.
Meth, yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah, used to call it crystal meth, right, back in the day. But that's more rural. You would see it in the suburbs like this, out to Aurora. The outlaws had a lot of that locked down, and that's my first couple of years in the job was that big war between the Hell's Henchmen and the Outlaws, because the Henchmen flipped Hell's Angels, and the Outlaws had worked for years to keep the Angels. The Outlaws pretty much ruled the Midwest, and then the Angels, had the coasts and the rest of the world. But the Outlaws were big, powerful, violent, and so the Hell's Henchmen, which were a small motorcycle club in Chicago, they got the opportunity to flip Angels, and the Angels wanted to foot in, and that kicked off a really ugly war that lasted.
Isn't that the
several
one
years.
where the bar got blew up?
Yeah, they had a clubhouse,
Yeah, clubhouse, yeah.
1700 block of West Grand. I was working midnights and sleeping when that happened, but they, or actually maybe I just started in the academy. I can't remember now. I'm sorry, but I wasn't there. I know because they said when it blew up, it shook the windows in the police academy, which is about 2 miles away, maybe a mile and a half away. There's that divot in the sidewalk was there up until about 6 or 7 years ago, and this was like 94, I think. Yeah, it was amazing that nobody was in there. It would have killed everybody. It was a big, powerful car bomb.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a bad war, but they moved a lot of meth, back in the day.
Allegedly.
Now you made detective, and now what was like your first case that you did as a detective?
Well, so what happens when when you get pulled into homicide is they don't give you homicides right away. The stakes are too high, right? Even if you're an experienced policeman, they send you out on jobs with more experienced homicide detectives. So I did that for me and my partner and I for about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months. And then our first murder we were assigned was the murder of a 6-year-old foster boy by his foster mother. That was the first case, and that was right at the start of 2001, which pretty harsh case to kind of start with, but it wasn't like a whodunit. She was in custody right away, right? I mean, and it also wasn't like really hard to get her to kind of say what happened, but so that was the real first one. And then, we started catching more cases. I mean, it's so busy on the west side that eventually, as soon as they figure out, okay, they can handle it, you're on the rotation, man. You know what I mean? And the worst was your first day back from furlough, because your first day back from vacation, it doesn't matter what else is going on, you're up, right? Because you've been off, and the other thing too, this is probably terrible thing to say, but just the way life works, if you were hungover, you could count on you're going to catch a case that day, and you weren't going home for 2 days. That's the rules of karma, I think, or whatever, But so
So, off to all the cases, you ever had anybody just like confess while you were talking to them, like right there at the spot that it happened?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It doesn't. I mean, that's uncommon,
Right.
but it does happen. You know what I mean? Domestic murders, especially. But.
As the guy sitting there holding the weapon, I don't know what happened.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, you get a lot of you should get a guy in a room and show him on video and say, "Who's that?" And they'll be like, "That guy looks a lot like me, but that ain't me."
Shockingly, looks a lot like that. I must have a twin out there.
Yeah.
What do you people call that a doppel? I'm like, yeah, no, I don't think that's your doppelganger, bro. But yeah, so yeah, it happens. It kind of goes one of a couple of ways. Either that they're confessing in the door, you got enough. They're not talking at all, but you got enough evidence right away because there are witnesses, that are telling you what happened right away. Or they lawyer up inside the door, and then you got to put the case together.
Mhm.
If you believe that their person did it, you have to prove it. Or you have the kind of slow burn of people who will talk to you but want to lie, want to try and get themselves out from underneath, and that's just then the grind of talking to him. And for my style was just always like kind of like just overwhelm, trying to overwhelm, as my old partner said, overwhelm them with common sense. Like, I hear you. You said this, but here's why that doesn't make sense, right? Because this can't be if this is it. And so then they give you another story, and eventually it's like, okay, well, shit. Yeah, I was there. You know what I mean? That's kind of the spectrum of the way those go.
In your years of being homicide detective, you ever had a case that just gone cold and just still unsolved?
Yeah. I had several of those, and then I worked in the cold case unit, so I looked at murders going back to the 50s. They're still open, and yeah, they're frustrating. The thing is what happens in the modern era is more often than not the cases that are not solved. You have a pretty good idea, if not exactly who did it, who's responsible in terms of like gang or whatever, but you just don't have enough to get it over the hump and as far as charging, let alone conviction. So on those cases, you're just hoping for better days, and better days sometimes come because guys are, friends of the victim or whatever. They're sitting in the joint and they reach out and they want to talk and things like that. So those cases can end up getting clear. But yeah, I mean, I got several that I worked on that I would love to have seen a conclusion on, and just not gonna happen. You know what I mean? And that sucks, but you gotta, at some point, you gotta realize that's the life, you know?
Now, how about like a deathbed confession? You, you ever had anybody ever had one of those? Like you see on TV, like I want to confess what I did while I'm laying here dying. Or
Yeah, it does happen, but the problem is it's Cook County, USA, right? So judges hate that. If it's just me as a detective and a guy is dying and tells me, okay, I did it, or he thinks he's dying, better yet, and he doesn't die, and now he gave me a confession believing he was going to die, which is by law a kind of deathbed confession, admissible. Judges just don't like that without corroboration, and if they actually did do it and they are and they do die, then if there's enough evidence surrounding that confession, you can still close the case. We call them exceptionally closed, clear closed, and that is by the death of the offender. So the theory being, if that person was still alive, you could likely get them charged with the murder. You know.